You're listening to Deliberate Living, a podcast that inspires, empowers, and encourages listeners to live life more authentically. My name is Holly Priestley, and I'm a full-time nomad and writer who has been living in my 1997 Ford van since January 1st of 2019. I travel the United States with my dog, learning how to live with more authenticity. I explore different ways people choose to ditch the prescribed life we've all been sold and live on their terms, finding freedom and happiness however they choose. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Deliberate Living podcast. I am your host, Holly Priestley, and this week's guest is a profession that I've never had on the show before, and I'm really freaking excited about it. Because I've always been curious about it as a profession myself, but also to share something new with y'all. My guest this week is Christina. She is a dog sled musher, has been a musher for the past almost 7 years. And this was a dream that grew out of, a 4-year-old watching Balto for the first time. And I think we all had those dreams when we watched like Balto or, any of the Disney movies where there were talking animals. I always wanted to surround myself with talking animals. And so Christina has basically done that. And we're going to hear more about her story today and where she plans to go next. So for everybody who doesn't know Christina of Whiteout Racing Kennels, hello.
Hi.
Can you give us a little bit of your backstory and how you got into racing sled dogs?
Yeah, so I am 20 years old and I live in the Methow Valley with my mom. And I grew up on the west side of the Cascades. And when I was 4, I saw Balto. And, like you said, as many other kids, I was just obsessed and in love. And I honestly, couldn't tell you what about it made me latch on to it so hard, but I remember telling my mom that I wanted to run the Iditarod, and I don't even know how I connected Balto to the Iditarod. Like, I was so young, I don't know how I knew, but I talked about it quite a lot for about 8 years, and when I was about 12, we finally got in touch with some dog mushers that were here in Washington in the Cle Elum area. And I went to a race and got to help out and see all the dogs and just watch teams leaving the starts and stuff. And these dogs, they're so excited. They're barking and excited to go. And the people were so nice and so welcoming. And I just, from that point on, I just knew that was what I wanted to be doing.
Yeah. I think that's so cool.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, my family was pretty open and welcoming to whatever the fuck idea I had. We always had dogs, but never actually sled dogs. We did have we had a Malamute when we lived in Idaho, and then I mean, I'm sure you know Malamutes. They are big personalities.
Oh yes.
We bred her with another Malamute, and then we had 12 Malamutes for a short period of time. And my brothers were toddlers, and it was I don't know what my parents were thinking. I have no freaking clue. But I think your mom did a really cool thing of making you wait and not giving you everything you wanted right when you wanted it, your whole sled dog team at 4 years old, because that's very unmanageable. It doesn't set you up for success. But yeah, eventually you just kept talking about it and the idea didn't go away, and then she was willing to help you make it happen, and it seems like it's been a lifestyle. I mean, you're only 20 years old and it's been almost half your life that you've been doing it, which is crazy.
Yeah, it's been pretty insane, and I'm pretty lucky to have a mom that's so supportive. And I tell people this and they don't believe me at first, but my mom doesn't like dogs, which makes this whole thing so interesting, because right now I have 15 dogs in our front yard. So but she warmed up to it slowly. At first it was that I could have 2. I was allowed to have 2 dogs. And that quickly escalated as I realized that I wanted to be running the longer distance races. And she likes my dogs now. And she's actually run a 100-mile race herself. But it's been quite the adventure. So I'm pretty lucky to have such a supportive mom.
Yeah, that's incredible. I don't even like dogs. I'm going to let my daughter have 15. Why not? That's awesome. your first race, how old were you? How long was it? What was that experience like? What was like your very first take the dogs out on a race? What was that like for you?
Oh boy, I remember it kind of like it was yesterday. It was such a big day for me. It was a 2 dog race and it was 2 miles long, and it was an out and back. And I believe I was 14. And at that point, I was really afraid of being out in the woods by myself with my team. I've spent most of my childhood in the woods, but there was something about being out, miles from other people that I just hadn't quite had that experience yet. And so
13, that's really young to have had that kind of experience.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and so my mom, it was a mile out and a mile back, and they had people at the end of the mile to help you turn this was a junior race, so it was all kids. There were only 2 of us running, and my mom snowshoed half a mile out onto the trail so that I would go, because I was so afraid that I didn't want to go. And it was wonderful. The people were so welcoming and so, the mushing community is such a tight-knit group. It's, people who maybe just enjoy being in cities and around a bunch of people. They want to be out in the woods with their dogs. And so we all connect really strongly with each other. And so, yeah, just that experience as a 14-year-old girl, like coming into this brand new sport that was just had so many unknowns, with 2 of my older senior dogs that, knew what they were doing so they could teach me. And the whole race was just really special for me.
Yeah. So you started off with 2 dogs and 2 miles, and you were terrified to do that. And then you're doing 100-mile races, which I imagine take a smidge longer and probably more dogs, and you're farther away from all of the people. What was that transition like? And like, do you still get afraid?
Yeah, the transition has been crazy. Oh boy, now I have to remember what happened when, but about 4 years ago was when I first started stepping more into distance dogs. And I had run the longest race that I was running, I think a 4-mile junior race, and I met my mentor, Laura. And she took me out with her team of 18 dogs. I was riding in the sled, and I had a blast. I had so much fun. And I was like, the thing that was starting to creep up on me was that we were training all winter for races that only lasted, 15, 20 minutes long. And I wanted more. Like, I wanted to do more. And so when I connected with Laura, she started, I got some dogs from her, and she started teaching me more about the running longer distances. And, I ended up running like a 22-mile junior race, which was super fun, and really nerve-wracking, but really rewarding for me. And that was the winter that I decided that I wanted to run the junior Iditarod. And I went from running it was a very quick transition, because I went from running a 22-mile junior race to running 2 100-mile races and a 150-mile race the next season. And that season was, you were talking about, do I still get afraid? Absolutely. There have totally been times, even this last season, where I could feel those nerves creeping in. I think the experience that I have now, as you do things more, you get more comfortable with them. And I also have gotten much more comfortable with sitting with fear and being afraid, and that's okay. I think there's often this learned thing where if we're afraid, right, our fear is there for a reason, right? So our natural reaction is, if we're afraid of something, that, oh, okay, we shouldn't do that, right? It's our brain keeping us safe. But I've gotten comfortable with feeling it, like, okay, I'm feeling this fear, I'm afraid. That's there for a reason. It's telling me something, it's keeping me safe. I appreciate it. But that I can also use the other side of my brain and rationalize and go, okay, actually, I'm on a trail that's marked, and I have all of my dogs with me, who are my best friends, who I love to spend time with. We've been training all year for these races, and you know, being able to connect with your fear like that, I think, is a really important skill to have, and it's certainly very important for dog mushing.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that would be one of those activities that is so, what's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily risky, but I mean, anytime you do any kind of like physical activity outside, it's inherently risky, right? Like I climb and I backpack and I hike and I run and I do all those things. And like, I know what I'm doing and I've been doing it for years. And, you know, I still hear stories or have friends, you know, like step wrong, twist an ankle, and then, you know, like, what are you going to do if you're out there by yourself and you don't have cell service and all of that? I imagine that dog mushing is a very similar experience. Like, you know what you're doing, you've been practicing for it, you're not alone, you have 15 fucking dogs with you, and people know you're out there, you're on like a predetermined course, you're not just out, you know, exploring the woods by yourself or anything like that. But yeah, I imagine that accidents happen and things can be scary sometimes, and having that fear and doing it anyway is something that we've actually talked on the podcast a lot about lately in all different aspects of life. And, you know, like you said, the more you do it, the less afraid you get. And it's not necessarily that, you know, you're going to run a race someday and like never be afraid. Like, you're probably still going to be afraid, but having that like learned experience of being afraid and doing it anyway and getting over the fear, I think like that whole process, because so many people stop at the fear part, right? So having to move through it and having that like learned synapse of moving here and not just letting fear be like the wall that stops you is pretty incredible, especially for somebody to learn so freaking young.
Yeah, I mean, it's been such a journey, and I mean, yeah, all of that, you're super correct, and there's always things that can go wrong, right? Like, that's the thing. And you know, the thing about dog mushing that's, I think, really interesting, you know, you were talking about climbing and hiking and running, and you know, people get injured all the time doing that. That's you know, just that's a given. When you go out into the wilderness by yourself or with somebody else, there's just always this possibility that something's going to happen. And with dog mushing, you have to keep, like, your emotions have to be in check, because the wild card in this situation is not only Mother Nature, right? It's also that you have a team of dogs, and these dogs know what they're doing, you know, you've trained them, all of that, but they feel everything that you're feeling. So if I'm out there and I get afraid, they start looking back at me going, okay, why is she, what's wrong? Like, why is she upset? Why, you know, they start to feel nervous and afraid. And so it's been such a learning experience. You know, when I ran Junior Iditarod, that was one of the hardest runs that I've done, not in terms of the course or the race itself, but like mentally it was really challenging, because it was, you know, such this big thing that I worked for so long for. And so then, you know, it was really nerve-wracking. I thought I was going to throw up when I left the starting chute. You know, I was really worked up about it. And I remember finishing that race and feeling so connected to my dogs after traveling with them for over a day, which in the big picture isn't very long. That's not a very long time. Some of these races take, you know, multiple days. You know, you look at Iditarod, that takes, you know, 8 to 14 days. And I just remember finishing and feeling like, one, that I was on top of the world. I finished dead last, but I had finished and I was on top of the world. And I just remember thinking, if I can do this, absolutely terrified, then there's nothing that I can't do. There's nothing holding me back except for myself. Yeah. And I remember finishing and being so happy and thinking, all of this fear is worth it. Like, working through this is what makes it worth it. Yeah. And that's something special.
Yeah. That's fucking huge.
Yeah.
One thing you said earlier, I want to kind of circle back to. You said that on one of your races, you met your mentor, Laura. And when you guys first got started, when you were 12, you met some other dog mushers. I feel like having mentors, you know, either older than you or more experienced than you or both or whatever, having other people who have been in the lifestyle that you want to be in to kind of help guide you on your way is really important. But also, outside of like school and some job prospects, finding mentors can be a really big challenge. Do you have any suggestions for how you go about finding a mentor in whatever you want to do in life?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When Laura and I met, it kind of just, something about it just clicked, you know, like it just made sense. She was running dogs the way that I wanted to run dogs. She was being competitive. She had great dog care. Her dogs were super, super happy. And she was just a really genuine, kind person to the people around her. And so that's been the biggest thing for me. And, you know, people have asked me that question, like, how do you find these people to teach you these things that you want to do? Yeah. And I think, I think that people come along when they should in your life. And at least in my experience, looking back on things and when I've met people and, you know, the things that we've done, like, it's like, oh, that person I was supposed to meet that person at that time. And so that plays in, and also finding someone that's doing what you want to do the way you want to do it.
Yes.
I think that's such a big thing, because I mean, and people who are doing things differently, that's not to say that you shouldn't go learn from different people or from different things. Like, that's really, really important too, right? Get out of your own little zone of like the way you do things. Like, look at how other people do things. That's really important. You know, maybe you see something that you like, maybe you want to change something, but finding a mentor that is not only doing whatever sport or profession you want to do in the way you want to do it, but also in the way that they interact with life, with other things as well. I think that's really important, if not more important in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, you know, the way that you approach anything is the way that you approach everything. And so, you know, that's one reason, like, if you meet somebody and you know, pre-COVID or post-COVID, you go get a meal or a bar, you know, go to get a drink or something with them and they treat the wait staff poorly, it's like, that's not a person you want to hang out with, because they might be being nice to you right now, but they'll be mean eventually. Or, I mean, as a dog mom myself and a huge animal lover, the way you treat animals speaks volumes to me, and I imagine that's true for you too. So finding somebody who like is living with integrity and walking the talk, and then also like you can see it through her interactions with others, but you can see it in the care of her dogs, is pretty incredible.
Yeah It's pretty awesome.
What do you think are some of the biggest pros and cons of being a sled dog racer?
Who, you know, that list could go on. I think pros and cons, I think, you know, the realistic side, in terms of cons, financially, it's really quite a lot. You know, not only, you know, forget the feeding bill for feeding these guys, which, you know, we buy food by the pallet a couple times a year. Oh my God. So, you know, that alone is the deal. But not only that, there's, you know, vet care. My dogs see a vet so much, and you know, I have to have like all of, like, I I have a whole vet's office in my medical cabinet, you know, like I have to have all this stuff just to keep them safe and healthy. And, you know, in case anything ever goes wrong, and equipment and paying gas money for getting to races and training and, you know, entry fees, all of that. It takes, I do a lot of like crowdfunding and stuff for my race team when we go race, or if we're planning a big event, you know, we do that quite a bit, which is really important. It's really amazing to have such a community around my team. Something that I never thought would be possible. I've had so much support from people that I know and people that I don't know that are so invested in the team. And it's just really been super special for me. So the financial side is one. I think also there's a time thing. For me, actually, this is something that's new for me this year, is not having this fear. But I always, like, ever since I really started to get into dogs, there's been this fear of, like, essentially fear of missing out, right? Because it takes so much time to run these dogs and train them and take care of them. You know, these guys in the off season, they're not some bike that I can put in the shed and forget about and go on road trips. And, you know, no, like, they need to be fed and they need to have water and they need, you know, their emotional stimulation every day, and they need love. And you can't put them away, right? And there's not a lot of dog daycare services that will take 15 dogs. So you know, so I just had this really big fear of, like, being like, oh, there's so many things to do in this world. What if I'm not doing the right thing? What if I'm not picking the one that's right for me? And within the last year and a half, I just had this realization of, okay, there's always going to be a little bit of that doubt there, because the truth is, I'm competitively, you know, when you're competitively doing something and you're pouring all of yourself into it, there's always going to be a little bit of a question of, is this the right thing? Because it's so much work, right? But I also just realized that, one, that it was still possible for me to take time to do the other things that I wanted to do. You know, my mom has been really, really awesome, and she'll take care of the dogs for a week in the summer while I go hiking with friends, or do something that's on my list that I want to do. So I still get that, you know, little bit of time to do my own thing. But also that it wasn't me that was missing out on everything. It was that I was experiencing this world that most people don't get to.
Yeah.
And that's so special. And yeah, I mean, it's a very challenging lifestyle. That's what I would say. It's very challenging. It's very emotionally taxing, financially taxing. You don't have a lot of extra time. It's very serious. You know, you can't just get a team of sled dogs and let them sit in the yard. They need, you know, they need to run, and they need love, and they need care. And but the pros that I've experienced from this by far outweigh all of that, no matter how challenging it gets. I think that the person that I am today is really, really different than I would be if I didn't have these dogs. And I think that person is a lot happier and is a lot more capable. And I've had these incredible experiences that some people go their entire lives and they're never out in -20 degrees, let alone out in -20 degrees with a bunch of dogs that they love and seeing the sunrise over the mountains in Alaska. Like, you can't beat that. You really can't.
Yeah, and it might not be like a once in a lifetime experience for you, but for so many people, that's a never in a lifetime experience.
Yeah.
I think that all of us, no matter what the fuck we're doing with our lives, have feelings of like, what if this is the wrong thing? What if I'm wasting my time? What if I'm missing out on something that will never happen again? Whatever. And like, I mean, you are, right? Like, we have all of the time in the world, but also there's only so many things we can do in any given minute. right? Like I'm living in Arizona right now, which means I cannot be in Alaska because you cannot be in two places at once. So I'm missing out on the negative 20-degree sunrise. But I have this other incredible experience that, you're not having because you're not here.
Yeah. Yep.
But I think that, you're never gonna, nothing in life is necessarily like a life sentence, right? Like you're gonna do dog mushing. If you decide that you want to do something else, you can do something else. Like nothing is ever going to, it feels in the moment a lot of the times like it is like whatever decision I make here is going to impact the rest of my life, and it might impact the rest of your life, but it doesn't have to be the rest of your life. So if you take a direction and you realize that you don't necessarily love where it's going and you don't align with it anymore, like you can pivot, you can change your mind, you can backtrack, you can try all sorts of different things. So lean into what you're doing and lean into what feels good, and move on from there.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And and it's something I always considered. My mentor-in-law, she has retired from dogs now. I actually have her, her old race team, and you see that there's a point where some dog mushers, they do it for their life. They love it and it's what they're supposed to be doing. And some people do it for a while and it's awesome and it's what they're supposed to be doing and it feels good and it's awesome. And then there's a point where they're like, okay, now I want to go do this other thing. And I think it's like that for so many people in so many different professions, that there's this pattern of thinking that like what I pick now, it's what I'm doing for the rest of my life. And really, I could do dog mushing for 30 more years. I could do it for 10 more. If I did dog mushing for 10 more years, I could do double what I've done in the last 7 years and still have a really full career, and then have the rest of my life still to do other things. And I'm just very comfortable with that. Who knows, maybe I'll be running dogs when I'm 60, maybe I won't, and that's okay. It's just wherever life takes me. But I'm really, regardless, the way that these dogs have touched my life won't ever be erased. That's not something that can leave me. It's always something that's going to be with me. And I think that's really special.
Yeah, I think you're probably learning a lot of life lessons from having a team of dogs. Even when you got your first dog or your second dog and now you have 15 dogs. I mean, the things we've probably learned a lot about life, a lot of similar lessons from life, but we've learned them coming at it from two totally different directions. And that's true of anybody doing anything. But yeah, I mean, I grew up with animals and I'm a huge animal lover, and I would love to be a dog sled racer someday, even if just for one day. And yeah, I learned so much from my little brown dog over here who's just sleeping and ignoring everything. But yeah, I think that's incredible. What do you think the future does look like for you? I mean, you said if you mush for the next 10 years, that would be great. But what do you like? Are you doing the college route? Are you working on any other kind of career format, or is it like all dogs all the time? Because I imagine that is probably a 24/7 lifestyle. Or how does the next couple of years look like for you?
Oh yeah, it definitely is a 24/7 thing. So my schooling has been really different. It's been very different. I stopped going to school when I was in 4th grade, and started unschooling, which is something that a lot of people don't talk about, but I think is actually a lot more popular now.
Yeah.
And well, for one, I wouldn't change that. I feel very, very lucky to have a mom that wanted me to pursue what I felt passionate about and supported me in that. And so I am currently not planning on attending like a 4-year college per se. I do hope to at some point go to a photography school, which is usually a shorter term thing. so so from junior Iditarod, I got a scholarship from the sportsmanship award. And so my hope is to use, that, which comes from running dogs, to attend a school. And that's something that for me, wherever I end up, if it's that I stay in Washington and run dogs, or I go to Montana and run dogs, wherever I'm at, photography, one, is always something I can use for my kennel, because I love taking pictures and I love taking pictures of my dogs. But it's also something that I can use as a profession, wherever I go, right? Photographers are always in, and people always need them. And
I bet races have photographers.
Oh yes, definitely. And that would be a dream job for sure. Although it might be a problem if I'm running those races. But my future is definitely at the moment very wrapped up in dogs. And I'm actually really in that in between point of like, okay, this is a point, where if this is something I want to do long term, I have to figure out how to fully support it, and fully support not only what I have now, but going deeper into it, and potentially doing longer races that take bigger entry fees and more traveling and more training time. So not only are my races going to be increasing, but then time for other things is going to be decreasing. So how do you have a job that funds that? And a lot of mushers have seasonal jobs, because it's so hard to be going to work when you're also training. Training runs for 100-mile races can take 8 hours out of your day, easy. And so, that's kind of the little limbo I'm in right now, is like, okay, looking into different options and seeing what's out there and where do I want to be. And there's a couple options, you can run tours with dogs, and we're in a great place for that. We're here in Washington, and the Methow Valley has just a massive winter tourism thing. So, okay, like maybe I could run some tours and, not only work with my dogs, which would be phenomenal. Who doesn't want the cutest coworkers on the planet? But also share what I'm doing with other people. That would be really special. I also do presentations sometimes for schools and stuff. So, maybe going more into that as an option. And in terms of running dogs, right now I'm training for a race called the Yukon Quest 300. So there's 2,000-mile races that we have here, the Iditarod and the Yukon Quest. And the Yukon Quest also runs that second race, that's the 300-mile. And so right now my hope is to run that race within the next 4 years. I have a litter of puppies that are coming this April, that I'm so excited about. It's my first ever litter of puppies, right? I always had this thing where I was like, no, when I'm not gonna breed my own dogs until it gets too expensive for me to buy dogs that are at the caliber of team I'm running. And so because I've reached that point, I finally get to have a litter of my own munchkins.
Oh my God, that's gonna be so fun.
I'm so excited. I love puppies, and they're a lot of work, but I'm so stoked. And so my hope is that those pups will be growing up, and that they'll be part of that team that I'll be running for the Yukon Quest. And so that's like 3 to 4 years. And my plan is, if I'm gonna get there, and I'm gonna run it, and then I'll decide, okay, are these longer distance races something that I really want to commit to? And if they are, then I'd like to go run the Iditarod. So we'll see. We'll see how that all goes. But at this point, the goal overall is still to run the Iditarod.
Yeah. I think that's really cool to have a basic understanding of where you want to go and what you want to do, but also be flexible with how it actually works out. And I cannot wait for the puppy spam.
Oh yes, there's gonna be lots of pictures on Instagram.
Perfect. Christina, what kind of advice would you give to someone who is kind of waffling on following a lifelong dream, or maybe someone who's specifically interested in sled dogs?
I would say that there's in chasing dreams, that there's a lot of sacrifice that happens. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And that sometimes, I mean, there's the cliche of like, oh, it's really hard and you have to sacrifice a lot and all that. And that's 100% true. And at least to me, in doing so, there's been a lot of times where I was like, I mean, like I said earlier, there's been a lot of times where I've been like, wow, is this really what I should or want to be doing? Right? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of sacrifice. I can't tell you how many times I've been up until 4 a.m, and it's a commitment. And I think that those are the things, what for, people who maybe have climbing goals or, specifically in the outdoors, usually they're things that are very physical and challenging, and it's hard, and it's half of it is in your head, sometimes more than half of it. And it's worth it though, if you're really like, for me, it's okay. If I don't try, is this going to be something that I regret? And if I do try and I don't make it, is it still worth it? And the answer for me is yes, because I don't want to get to the end of my life and be at a point where I'm like, oh, I wish I had done this thing, right? So when a race really scares me, because I've had a couple races where I was like, man, I really don't feel like doing this right now. And it's always been, if I don't do this, am I gonna regret it? And that question has always kept me going. And so for people who are looking at, maybe chasing something that's, a pretty big nosedive or a really big life change, or something that they, maybe don't have a lot of support in, or all of that, I would say that you are gonna attract the energy that you put out there. So if you truly give it what you've got, you're gonna get that back. And sometimes it doesn't feel like it, right? Sometimes the things that are supposed to happen, sometimes we don't like how they're happening.
Yeah.
But that's also okay. And that's just part of it.
That's some pretty big wisdom from someone who's 20 years old. I love it. I love breaking those expectations for sure. Christina, how could people come follow you online if they want to see more about your journey, your story, keep up to date with what races you're running and how they can help, and also see all of that cute puppy spam that's coming in April?
Mostly for the puppies.
I mean, let's be honest here. We're all here for the puppies.
We're all here for the puppies. I mean, me too. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
So we have a website. It's whiteoutracingkennel.com. So that has all info on the dogs and our races and the channel and all of that. It's got info on sponsorships. Everything's there. We also have an Instagram and a Facebook. It's Whiteout Racing Kennel. And we have a Twitter as well, which is just Whiteout Racing.
Cool. Awesome. And I will link to those in the show notes as well. Thank you everybody for tuning into this episode. I have really enjoyed talking to Christina, fulfilling a little bit of my own girlish dreams through her, obviously. And I hope that you got some wisdom out of this young, vibrant, bright light who is coming up into the world. I'm really excited. If this is how the next generation is coming up, like, we're going to be okay, you guys, we're going to be okay. But if you liked this episode, please do go ahead and like it, give it 5 stars, whatever it is on the platform that you're consuming it, because that helps the algorithms see us so we can go be seen by all the other people. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. Share this episode with someone who you think could really use a good kick in the pants and a good little piece of inspiration from someone following their dreams that they've had since they were 4 years old. If you want to help offset some of the costs that go into producing the show and keeping it ad-free, I have a Venmo and a PayPal set up and linked in the description as well. And I hope you guys tune in next week for another excellent episode. And I hope you're living your deliberate dreams right now as well. Bye.
We've reached the end of this episode of Deliberate Living. You can find the show notes and everything we referenced over on my website, and be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts on YouTube, or sign up for email updates every time something new is published. I'll see you next time on Deliberate Living, and until then, keep your life on the DL too.